breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcast, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of violence against children, including sexual offences and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Lizzie. How are you?
I'm very well, Joe. How are you?
Well, I lost my glasses. I don't know if you've noticed. I'm wearing my spare pair.
Yes, they are different.
Yeah, I left them in a taxi cab.
Oh,
I know, and I wasn't even drunk. I was stone cold sober, so I've got no excuse.
That's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, apart from that, are you well?
Apart from that, I'm well.
Excellent. Today, I thought I'd tackle a bit of a well-known case.
Yes.
Which is the abduction and murder of Daniel Morcombe.
Yes.
Back in 2007 that occurred. But the reason I was thinking about it is there was an article published in the media earlier this month reporting on a community call for a public sex offender register.
Yes.
Somehow it was revealed that there was a sex offender living right next to a children's park in a suburb on the Gold Coast.
Yes.
And so the media got hold of members of that community and they were saying we should be able to know if there are sex offenders, they shouldn't be allowed to live close to parks, you know, the usual kind of outcry.
So the person was living close to a park, not close to a school.
Not close to a school, close to a park. That was a children's playground.
Okay. So as I understand because there is a sex offenders register in Queensland.
Only for police.
To see, yeah.
Yes.
Well, and police are supposed to identify where people are living sex offenders are living, so they can work out whether they're going to be close to children or not.
Yes, and they have the option, I think, under legislation to restrict someone from residing in a place close to children. Yes,
but I mean, that's obviously might be difficult since children are everywhere.
Well, and that article said that it's not often utilised. But so that idea of a public sex offender register is one that crops up all the time. It
makes good copy for newspapers because it inflames people in the community and so, sells more newspapers. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and it is a valid consideration to think about when we...
I don't know, I'm not sure about that.
Why?
Okay, so people say, the people that are interviewed by the newspaper apparently have said, well, we should know if sex offenders live in their area. It's like, well, I'm not sure that we should. I mean, our criminal justice system is designed the way it is so that we don't have, mob justice. We don't have, lynch mobs and vigilantes. And I think publicising that there is a sex offender living in your area really opens the door to that. So the idea that the state should monitor where a sex offender lives, I think is probably sensible, and the police do that. How effectively they do that, I don't know, but if they're not doing it effectively, that's not a problem with the system. That's a problem with how the system's being administered.
Yeah, I'm a bit torn. I see some benefits to it, although, I mean, interestingly, when there was a suggestion for a domestic violence offender register to be made public, I was against that because I feel like that's putting responsibility on potential victims to be checking. But anyway, so I was just doing a little bit of reading and I had not realised that Daniel Morcombe's parents have been very vocal about seeking a public sex offender register for a number of years now. And so then I was thinking about that whole case and I thought, let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Terribly, terribly sad case.
Really sad case. And I mean, I'll talk about what happened to poor Daniel, but also the consequences of that whole investigation because, it was protracted and there were some suggestions that police handling of the matter was not optimum. And so
I think it was more than suggestions. I think it was found, wasn't it, by a coroner that it was suboptimal.
Not in error according to the policies at the time. But yes,
Yeah.
there
so
were issues.
no
So,
systemic change, just problems in how it was administered.
well, there'd been systemic change between Daniel's disappearance
Right.
and then the inquest. So we'll talk about all of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's go back and we'll go through the facts of the offence firstly. So Daniel James Morcombe was born in Melbourne on the 19th of December 1989.
Mm-hmm.
His family moved to the Sunshine Coast in 93. Daniel had a twin brother and an older brother. And the Morcombes were franchises for a business called Jim's Trees, which related to tree pruning and removal.
Yep.
Daniel and his brothers, Dean and Bradley, went to Siena Catholic College.
Mm-hmm.
He had just completed Year 9 in 2003, so he was 13.
Yeah.
And he and his brothers worked picking passion fruit on a part-time basis for the neighbours.
Yeah.
He was described as a normal 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
He had a secure family background, quiet in nature, not troublesome, much loved son, brother and grandson.
Yeah.
A family who owned the passion fruit farm lived at a place called Woombai, and they would go and pick passion fruit. So it would be like a 2-hour stint in the morning.
Yeah.
And that was their pocket money. And so on the morning of the 7th of December, Daniel and both of his brothers were at their job picking passion fruit. At about 9:45 a.m., they were driven back home on the farm's quad bike, and he had been given his weekly pay, for which he got $90.
Yep.
That same day, Daniel's parents had a Christmas party to go to, and the idea was that the boys would accompany them to the party. They would have time when they got back from their morning shift to get ready and go. It was in Brisbane, which was about an hour and a half from where they lived. But it had rained earlier that morning, and so there was a delay to the start time for the picking, and they didn't finish in time to accompany Mr. and Mrs. Morcombe to the party. So the parents had talked about that with them, and they were like, we're fine to miss that party.
Of course they would be, yeah.
And so the new plan was that Daniel was going to catch a bus to the local shopping centre, do some Christmas shopping, I think get a haircut. And he'd done that about 15 times before, caught the bus, gone shopping, caught the bus back.
Can I say, at this point, it just sounds like such a lovely bucolic childhood. You know, he's given personal responsibility, you know, he has a bit of freedom, you know, it just sounds, you know, ideal,
yes.
And then this tragic event occurs.
So wholesome, like he was
absolutely
going to buy Christmas presents for his family.
Yeah.
So Daniel left home at about 1 p.m. to embark on his Christmas shopping. He had to walk to the Nambour Connection Road to catch a bus to the shopping centre. At the time that he left home, he was wearing a pair of navy blue shorts, a red Billabong t-shirt and a pair of Globe shoes. Not sure. I'm sure that's a cool brand.
Okay.
He had his wallet with him. He had about $100 in cash, his key card, a student card, a video store card, if we remember those,
jeepers.
And a phone card, obviously before the days of everybody having a mobile phone. So it was about a 1.3 kilometre walk, and he waited for a bus while standing under what is called the Keel Mountain Road overpass.
Right.
So it wasn't a designated bus stop, but it was a place where passengers were frequently collected from. So it was known to be a spot where you could hail down the bus going to the shops. The Nambour Connection Road is a major arterial road. And the Keel Mountain Road overpass went across that major road. On either side were roundabouts, and at the time that Daniel disappeared, there was a Christian outreach centre located adjacent to the overpass.
Right.
So that's the geography at the time.
So it sounds like quite a busy area.
Very busy. And
so what day are we to? This is a Saturday. Oh, it's the 7th of December. They're probably on school holidays.
They were on school holidays.
Right, okay.
Yes. Mr. and Mrs. Morcombe returned from their Christmas function. They got home at about 4 p.m. The bus company, Sunbus, operated each day until like on that route.
Yes.
I think the last bus from the shopping centre left at about 5.
Yeah.
But they were expecting him to be back by about 4:30. So Mrs. Morcombe went down and went to that bus
Yes.
hailing area, not a bus stop. Daniel wasn't there, so the dad went back an hour later expecting him to have caught the last bus.
Yeah.
He wasn't there. So
Yeah.
they then drove to the shopping centre.
Yes.
And they were looking for Daniel there because, as I said, no mobile phones.
Yes.
They then tried to telephone the bus company to see if anyone could remember picking him up, but nobody answered. They intercepted a bus on the road and the driver informed them that there was nobody at the depot at that time of day. It was closed.
Right. Okay.
So then they went back to the shopping centre to make further inquiries and look for Daniel again. And they then decided to go to the Maroochydore police station.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this a couple of times on this podcast when we deal with these kind of child killings, but this is just the parent's worst nightmare, isn't it? You know, you're expecting your child to come home. They don't come home. You can't get in touch with them. You're looking around.
And you would start, I guess, by feeling irritated. God, where is he?
Yeah.
What's he doing? He should have been on that bus.
Yeah.
And you just don't know.
I know, and then you just get more and more and more panicked.
So panicked. So it was about 7:30 by the time they got to the police station.
Yep.
They were met at the front counter by Sergeant Robbie Munn, and they spoke to him for about 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So he did take some details in relation to Daniel's physical appearance, the family relationships, his general well-being. Did he have any mental health issues?
Yep.
And Mr. Morcombe told Sergeant Munn was completely out of character for Daniel. There'd been no issues at home. He'd gone shopping for Christmas presents for the family.
Yeah.
They also told police what they'd already done in terms of trying to find where Daniel was. So Sergeant Munn advised them to return home. It was likely his disappearance was a misunderstanding, according to Sergeant Munn. He was likely running late with his friends, and he wasn't going to list Daniel as a missing person at that stage.
Okay.
This is a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't know how many people are reported missing at police stations, but you could appreciate that police might be a bit slow to initially list somebody as a missing person.
Yeah, I don't know. I think 13's still just a little kid though.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. The Morcombes returned home and they started to contact Daniel's school friends, hoping someone had some information, but nobody had had any contact with Daniel at all that day. They then searched around the hobby farms, sheds and stables. They went back and conducted a search of the Keel Mountain Road overpass bus stops with a torch. During the course of that night, at about 10 and again at about 10:40, they received 2 phone calls from police checking to see if Daniel had come home.
Yeah.
And they said, no, he hasn't.
Yeah.
And so the second phone call was a different police officer, Senior Constable Campbell. He said for the Morcombes to go and make a formal complaint when the local police station opened in the morning. It was shut at that time of night.
Yeah.
At that point, Mr. Morcombe said he felt the police weren't really taking Daniel's disappearance as seriously as he would have liked.
Yes.
Which, fair, I think.
Okay.
As the parent, you would want...
Yes, of course, as a parent, you want them to immediately do absolutely everything in their power. Right. Police obviously have procedures which are not based on what parents want.
That's right. But that was the Morcombes'
of course.
feeling.
Of course. So
at first light, the next morning, the 8th of December, the Morcombes went again out searching.
Yes.
And they drove to the Keel Mountain Road overpass into the shopping centre. They walked the route that Daniel would have taken to the bus stop and back. And they had to wait 3 hours from when they'd started that process for the police station to open. So they were up nice and early trying to find Daniel.
You know, you'd struggle to sleep, wouldn't you?
100%. So it was 8 a.m. when they went to the police station after they'd dropped one of their sons at work. They were met there by Sergeant Davison, different police officer again, and he took a very thorough account in relation to the circumstances surrounding the disappearance, his movements on the 7th of December, the clothes he was wearing, and he then quite quickly established through phone calls to Sunbus that a boy matching Daniel's description was seen at the Kiel Mountain Road overpass bus stop. I call it a bus stop, even if it wasn't officially one.
Yeah.
He was wearing a red T-shirt, dark baggy shorts, and they were able to establish at that same time that he was seen in the company of an older male at the bus stop.
Okay.
Now, the police didn't tell Mr. and Mrs. Morcombe that at that point.
But so this is first thing in the morning the next day when another officer's taken a full account.
Yes.
They couldn't have found that information out any earlier, could they? Because the previous day when they'd called the bus depot, it was already closed.
It was already closed, although you wonder if the police would have had the ability to call
somebody. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of those unknowns.
Yeah.
So when they left the police station on that occasion, Mr. Morcombe said he felt confident that the police investigation was now underway.
Yes.
The police followed up at their home later that same day.
Yes.
So there was definite movement, activity.
Yes.
Investigation started.
Yes. I mean, this is all within, just 15, 18 hours of him being their first report.
Yes.
I mean, we've talked about cases on this where people have gone missing and the police have not moved that quickly.
Well, that's right. And I listened to another crime podcast from America, and they talk all the time about missing persons reports where the police will just treat them like a naughty kid. They'll be home. They'll be home. Yeah. And there's, so it wasn't that attitude here with Daniel.
No, I mean, I think I appreciate that Morcombe's view might differ, but I mean, it sounds like the police moved reasonably quickly.
Certainly the next morning, things kicked into gear.
Yeah.
Yes. This investigation into the disappearance of Daniel Morcombe, because, spoiler, he was not found for many years.
I know, so sad.
So sad.
Yes.
But a major incident room was established on the 9th of December, so the next day again.
Yes.
There were over 22,000 job logs created as part of the investigation, and each of those represented a piece of information or a physical exhibit that was investigated.
Yeah.
And the findings of that investigation was recorded.
So just for people who don't know, job logs, it's like a diary. It's like a police diary. It'll identify information they've got, what they've done with it, who's followed up, what the result of that was. And so if you go through them, which I've done in some cases, you get a real idea of exactly what the police are doing and when. It lists the time, it lists the officer, it lists what's the information.
Yeah.
So 21,000.
22,000.
That is a lot.
They also, the police report with annexures extended to over 10,000 pages.
Jeepers.
And over 100 police officers were involved, with over 10,000 individuals being interviewed.
Wow, that is a lot of people.
It is a lot. There is no way you could say that wasn't comprehensive.
No, absolutely not.
And apparently this investigation constituted the largest criminal investigation in the history of Queensland.
Wow. So, and over what time period are these 10,000 people being interviewed? Is this over the course of a couple of years?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, but still persistent and
yeah.
So there were, at the end of the day, 33 persons of interest who may have played a role in Daniel's disappearance. That was the number that they whittled down through the investigation.
Yeah.
There has definitely been arguments that the investigation was slow to start, and that if different conduct had been employed at an earlier stage, not just on the day that Daniel disappeared, but in the early stages of this investigation, the outcome would not have been different, but the period of unknowing would certainly have been curtailed.
Yeah.
So the Detective Senior Sergeant, who was the officer in charge of Nambour CIB, Criminal Investigations Branch, was Paul Schmidt. He had 20 years experience as a detective at that time.
Yep.
He took on, I think, the major incident room coordination and that sort of thing. He said that it was the next morning when Sergeant Davison became involved and was able to access information from the Sunbus company that elevated their suspicion that there was something untoward.
Yeah, well, being in the company of an older male.
Yes, and that Sergeant Munn's assessment that Daniel was likely with friends and would come home was not an error based on the information that he had at that time, which
Yes.
was nothing nefarious
Yes.
beyond him not returning home.
Yes.
So there was definitely a response to those claims that as soon as there was any kind of real concern,
Yep.
the investigation kicked right in.
Yep.
Senior Constable Campbell on the 7th of December had finished work when he got that phone call, spoke to the Morcombes, told them to come in and make the report.
Yep.
And so the first 72 hours following Daniel's disappearance, the State Emergency Service
Yep.
conducted extensive searches in the
Yes.
area. Police divers were also activated for
Yeah.
water searches.
Yeah.
Investigations were carried out into reported sightings of Daniel before and after his disappearance,
Yeah.
as well as into reported sightings of vehicles seen at that Kiel Mountain Road overpass.
Yeah.
His bank account was queried for any activities. Forensic examinations were conducted of the overpass and of the Sunbus vehicles that were linked to that location.
Yeah.
Extensive door knocks of residences and businesses all
Yes.
carried out.
Yeah.
They also secured CCTV footage from the shopping centre for examination and also from service stations within a 5-kilometre radius of the overpass,
Yes.
as well as from the local railway station.
Yeah. And presumably all of these turn up nothing. So they zoom in
Nothing.
on the idea that Daniel never made it past the overpass.
That's right. He didn't get to the shops. So then the Queensland Police started to interview known sex offenders who
Yes.
lived in the area.
Yes.
Not only links to that geographical area, but also specifically links to the Christian Outreach Centre, which was adjacent to that bus stop.
So did you meet sex offenders linked to the Christian Outreach Centre? They interviewed people from the
Yes.
Christian Outreach Centre.
So known sex offenders with links to the area and links to the outreach
Wow.
centre.
Okay. So I didn't see that coming. It's
Yes.
interesting. And there's no sex offender register at this time, is there? So they're
No,
just
no.
looking up based on people's driver's license and criminal history.
I think so,
Interesting. Okay.
yes. Inquiries were made with Sunshine Coast cabs for pickups and drop-offs
Yes.
in that area. So the State Crime Command specialists who dealt with child sex crimes
Yes.
were enlisted to review intelligence on convicted child sex offenders in the North Coast
Yes.
region.
Yeah.
And
And
they
this is where the
commenced
problem happens, isn't it?
they commenced interviews with persons linked to those offenders. So
So the bigwigs from Brisbane, as it were doing the interviews with the sex offenders who they'd identified.
well, they identified who should be interviewed.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
They prioritised the list.
Triaged.
Yes.
Right.
And the major incident room, which was codenamed Operation Bravo Vista, began to follow down any of these potential leads.
Yes.
The entire resource of the Child Protection Investigation Unit and the CIB were put to work on this case. That was about 60 police officers,
Yep.
as well as officers from the Tactical Crime Squad, Uniform Police and Water Police. There were 84 different eyewitness accounts of either
Wow.
Daniel, persons of interest or vehicles of interest, plus the accounts of people who'd been on the Sunbus.
And seen the bus go past him.
Yes.
Because wasn't that an issue that it just left him at the bus stop?
Yes.
Are you going to get to that?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Yes.
And those 84 sightings, were they sort of credible sightings? They're not just cranks calling into Crime Stoppers or something?
Well, so there was a whole vehicle identification
yeah.
part of the investigation.
Yes.
And they narrowed down on 3 different vehicles which were repeatedly identified as being in the area.
Interesting.
There was a blue car, a green car and a white car.
Okay.
And they really focused on the blue car.
Okay.
This was tracked to a fellow by the name of Douglas Jackway.
Okay.
And he had, in fact, stopped his car about 500 metres from the overpass. It had some mechanical issue that he had to deal with at that point in time.
Isn't that interesting? At the
Yes.
time Daniel was there?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. He ended up having had nothing to do with it.
Yes,
but interestingly, the man who was eventually convicted, Brett Peter Cowan, said he only knew about the offence because he'd run into Jackway, I think in prison maybe, and he'd told him. Actually, I made that up. I don't know if he was in prison, but he said Jackway told him about
That he'd
Daniel
been
Morcombe.
questioned about the Daniel Morcombe.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there was a little bit of there must have been a reason they were so interested in Jackway.
Yeah.
There was a lot of effort put into that blue vehicle investigation, which was another criticism levelled at the police down the track, because there were two other cars also seen
the green
at that
and the
time,
white
the
one.
green and the white one. And the white one was the one of interest.
Oh.
Yes.
Do we know what make and model?
It was a four-wheel drive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think I've got it in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Something like 1,600 calls had been made on mobile or through the mobile phone towers or whatever on that day. They tracked all of those down. There was 200 hours of CCTV footage that had to be gone through. Like it was intense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the blue vehicle. Now, I saw your eyebrows go up when I talked about the 84 different eyewitness accounts, and there were so many different pieces of information that came from those.
Yes.
So the blue vehicle was parked on the side of the road with a male person standing there with his arms crossed, not working on the car.
Okay.
There was a young male standing just behind the blue car. The rear passenger side door was open. The male was seen near the front driver's seat. There were two unknown male persons talking to a boy at the rear door of the car. A witness saw a blue car parked on the left-hand side of the road.
Yeah.
A blue car was parked with Daniel standing under the overpass, and two male persons were there.
I have had a case which required me to go back through police job logs, which identified information like this. And it's amazing how different the descriptions can be, but also because the information comes in over the course of the next couple of days. Often people get their days mixed up, and they think they saw it all on Monday when was when the police are sort of. But in fact, they saw it on Tuesday or they saw it on Sunday. So I can completely appreciate how difficult it is to go through those and work out which ones are the ones that you really need to focus on, which ones aren't.
Well, and on the basis of the descriptions that had been provided, there were about 20 ComFit sketches put together.
Did any of because yes, ComFit, I've done some work on ComFit pictures and they are notoriously unreliable. Did any of them turn out to look like?
I think vaguely, but
that's the problem.
None of them really matched any of the persons of interest that the police were interested in.
The science on it is that that ComFits are horribly unreliable. Yeah. In fact, they did it, a test with test subjects, to look at a person and then put the ComFit together and then have a second person try and identify from a lineup which person had been the ComFit. And it was as successful as a person with no drawing experience doing a sketch.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so totally unreliable.
Wow. The police did end up just relying on the witnesses who'd given their earliest recollections and the most detail, and they were witnesses who had been on the bus that drove past.
Yeah.
Only one witness gave a statement about a white four-wheel drive parked at the side of the Nambour Connection Road, about 50 to 100 metres from the Kiel Mountain Road overpass.
Right.
At the time he passed Daniel standing at the bus stop. So put them at the same time.
Right.
There.
That's good. Okay.
So, all right, let's come back to our sex offenders.
Mm-hmm.
So before Daniel's disappearance, there was an operation established, Operation Butcher. Don't know where they come up with these names. And that was a strategic operation run through the Sunshine Coast District Intelligence Office.
Yep.
And the purpose was to capture data on pedophiles and pedophile networks that were impacting on the community, including pedophiles living in the Sunshine Coast District with a previous history of sexual offences against children.
Right.
Okay. So Operation Butcher had already generated a number of names within their own database before Daniel disappeared, and those persons were placed on job logs and were interviewed in relation to their whereabouts on the day that Daniel went missing.
Yes.
Task Force Argos officers were running those interviews together with local detectives.
Task Force Argos is child pornography, isn't it? Child sex offending.
I think so, yes. Right. So Brett Peter Cowan was identified as one of the major persons of interest right from the start. He came to police attention because of his previous history of offending against children, specifically an offence from 1987 against a 7-year-old boy and a 1994 offence against a 6-year-old boy.
Okay.
So I'll come back to those, but the Christian Outreach Centre is important here as well. It was also a place of interest, and a week after Daniel went missing, all of the cars entering and leaving the centre were filmed. There was footage of a white Mitsubishi Pajero that was registered to Cowan.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So they seized his vehicle and they ended up interviewing him.
So this is all still in December.
We're now on the 22nd of December.
Yeah, so this is within weeks.
Yes.
And it's all proceeding very well as far as I'm concerned, and they were on track to nab Brett Cowan.
So he volunteered his movements on the day of Daniel's disappearance. He said he'd driven past the location of Daniel's disappearance on the Nambour Road, Nambour Connection Road. He was going to pick up a mulcher. He had been working in the garden at his house until he left to go and pick up the mulcher. He cooperated with police, voluntarily gave them a DNA sample. He was happy for the police to inspect his car. His partner at the time corroborated his version of events in relation to his movements, said what he'd been wearing, which was shorts, singlet and thongs, said what time he had returned from collecting the mulcher. And it did seem to match some of the descriptions of the male seen speaking to Daniel at the bus stop, but the timing was problematic.
Oh, okay.
Because it left really just maybe 30 minutes unaccounted for in Cowan's day. The Mitsubishi was photographed, scientifically examined. They helped to establish his time frame through his telephone records. So he had called the owner of the mulcher at 12:50, saying he wanted to borrow it. Left his house, he said, 20 minutes later. He did receive a call at his home at 12:58. So he must have been home a bit longer than he said. Or indicating he'd left earlier.
Because Daniel's at the underpass, after 1 o'clock, isn't
He'd
he?
left home at 1.
Yes.
1.3 kilometres to get there.
Yes.
Then there were some further calls made from Cowan's wife to a friend, and then later from Cowan to his employer in the afternoon. Later that afternoon. And so that seemed to be the end of it at that point. So he didn't seem to have time.
And no DNA? I mean, this is
There was
2000
no DNA. 2003.
So, I mean, DNA's around.
Probably not as sophisticated as it is now.
No.
You know, all those things like touch DNA and that sort of thing. And so he then wasn't spoken to again until 2005. They were clarifying some of his timeline at that point. I couldn't work out exactly what, but there'd been some kind of information provided from the family court which caused the police to go back and look at Cowan again. That was not made easily accessible to me, and I read the coroner's report. But so because of that, they went back and spoke to him again. He was made to break down his time frame in much more detail. He remembered, I think at this point, that he had gone to see a friend to pick up some drugs, I think, and that he was always at her place for about 45 minutes when he went.
I see.
So they said there was like 30 to 45 minutes unaccounted for, quite a tight turnaround. He'd been seen before and after Daniel disappeared.
So before, presumably his wife and the telephone calls at home, after by the guy who had the mulcher that he was borrowing.
And then this friend, Sandy Drummond.
The friend who sells him drugs? All right. So there's only a 30 to 45 minute window.
So that seemed to be a bit of a stall in the case. There wasn't any further leads and nothing else really came about. And then there was an inquest into Daniel's disappearance. So that commenced in 2010.
So 7 years after he's disappeared, he's legally declared dead, so that it's an unexplained death, so the coroner has to investigate.
Oh, is that why it would have been then?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I'm just having a
That makes sense.
educated guess. Okay.
And so that inquest was on again, off again, all the way up until 2019.
Yeah,
So
because it stopped because of the investigation and the trial. And
so there were some hearing days in 2010, then in 2011, and then in 2011 it all blew up.
Right.
And then they had further hearing days in 2016 and 2019 after the matter had been dealt with.
Yes, and the coroner delivers their report at that point.
Yes, right at the end. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so in 2011, Brett Peter Cowan is called to give evidence at the inquest.
Yes.
He was living in Western Australia at that point.
Yep.
He said he'd gone there because his younger son had been removed from him by the Department of Children's Services because of his criminal history.
Right, okay.
And he had relocated to help his partner's chances of regaining care of his son because it demonstrated he would have nothing to do with the child.
Ah, right, okay. Is that the family court information that came to light? Why the child was taken off him?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was allowed limited access under supervision.
Yeah,
with his
supervised
child.
access. Okay, that's fine.
So he was questioned about his offending history, including sexual offences against young children that had been committed in the past. He said that the 1987 offence, and these are all quite unpleasant, occurred while he was on community service at a supervised playground.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay.
He said he took a boy aged about 7 into the toilets and molested him.
Jeepers.
He had tried to sodomise the child but was unable to do so. And he said that took place over about a 5 to 10 minute period.
That is, okay.
His 1993 offending occurred in Darwin. Mm-hmm. It involved a young boy who was his neighbour in a caravan park. Mm-hmm. The child came looking for his sister. Cowan knew that his sister was playing on the other side of the caravan park, but instead of taking him to his sister, he took the child through the back fence of the caravan park where he placed the child on the body of a wrecked ute car and molested him. He left the child among the car bodies. I think he thought he had killed him.
Really?
And left him there.
Wow. Okay.
And went back to the caravan park. And that offence apparently occurred over about 15 to 20 minutes.
Jeepers.
So these timeframes are important if we think about his unaccounted period of time.
Yeah.
He said to the inquest that neither of those offences involved violence. Okay. I don't think that was true.
No.
He agreed that after he first spoke with police, they had some difficulty accounting for all of his movements on that day.
Yeah.
He said he'd been able to help them further in 2005 because he remembered going to get the marijuana from Sandy Drummond.
Wow.
And he said at the inquest he thought it was funny that they still thought he had anything to do with Daniel's disappearance in 30 or 35 minutes or whatever it was. Just having to do something in half an hour and get rid of or anything like that.
Wow.
I don't think that's possible. That's what he said at the inquest.
Interesting. What an odd thing to say.
Very odd. And then he went on to agree that he had previously molested those two boys in under 30 minutes.
Wow.
And that he could unintentionally abduct, molest and accidentally kill a boy within 15 minutes.
Wow. Which was a reference to that boy in Darwin, wasn't it?
Yes.
Oh, my Lord.
He said he also only confessed to the Darwin offence because he knew that the police had located his DNA on the victim's clothing and that the Darwin incident made it clear that he would lie until he had no other choice.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So this is his questioning in 2011 at the Coronial
April
inquest.
2011.
Okay.
Yep.
And this then gives the police some ideas, doesn't it?
Well, there was evidence that the little boy in Darwin had been choked. Cowan denied that he had choked him. But
the kid choked himself? I mean, honestly.
But the little boy had gotten away, had recovered and staggered into a service station naked, dazed and bleeding.
Jeepers.
And he initially, when he was denying it, said to the police, I hope you catch the bastard who'd done it. But he got 7 years imprisonment for that charge. Or those
and that was his
charges.
second charge. 7 years.
Yep.
I would have thought a bit more, but anyway, okay.
Chillingly, the 1993 record of interview for the Darwin offence included this following exchange. Police officer: is it possible that you did strangle him? Cowan: could be, yeah. Police officer: can you tell me then why the doctors have told me that these injuries are pointing to or are a result of asphyxiation as a result of strangling? Cowan: I can't recall doing it. Police officer: would you agree it's possible that you did? Cowan: could be possible, yes.
You know, what I find sort of sad or inexplicable about this is why it takes a coronial inquest to get this kind of information. You know, they could have got that information in December of 2003
I
when
know.
they first questioned him. I mean, I suppose they've got a number of suspects and they're questioning a number of people, and, you know, you don't know which one to do a deep dive on, but, you know, you do feel like a real opportunity was missed back then.
Well, and I'll get to it, but there were 2 police officers who said after that interview with Cowan, he's the guy.
In December,
December
they
2003.
said he's the guy.
So
Wow.
we'll come to that.
Yeah.
All right. He also told the inquest that after arriving in Queensland, he had been accused of sexually offending against a 15-month-old child
Oh, my Lord.
and a 12-year-old boy, but he had not been charged in relation to those matters.
This is what he's admitting in the
inquest. Yep.
Okay.
He admitted to molesting children aged between 6 and 8 years at his local swimming pool when he was a teenager.
Okay.
So he has been a habitual pedophile.
Yeah, I know I'm not a psychologist, but I do understand that people who offend against children are very hard to rehabilitate. They sort of are.
There must be something wired wrong.
Yeah, bit of wrong wiring.
Is that incorrect politically to say that? But that's how I feel.
Let's go with it. Yep.
All right. So coming to December 2003, he had moved to Queensland so he could complete a sexual offenders treatment program. He was released and completed parole while living on the Sunshine Coast, and they were pastors at the Christian Outreach Centre.
Who's they?
His aunt and uncle. Sorry, did I not say that?
Oh, sorry. No, yeah.
He was released to them.
He was released to them. They're the pastors at the Christian Outreach Centre, hence his car going there.
Yes.
Is he on parole when he goes past and picks up Daniel Morcombe?
Well, he was released in 97 or 98
okay.
and then had 2.5 years parole. So no, he would have been finished.
Okay. Yeah.
He met his future wife through the church. They got married in September 99 and lived together there until 2004. So after Daniel disappeared.
Yeah, and then divorced, and they had a child together.
They had a child.
And that was the child that he lost.
Wasn't to have contact or custody of.
Yes.
So he admitted that he'd been using the internet on the night of the 6th of December, the day before Daniel went missing, for around 6 hours until about 4 a.m. He acknowledged he would have been looking at pornography, but he denied that it would have been related to children.
Yeah.
And then his internet usage completely stopped for a week following Daniel's disappearance. So I don't know.
Wonder how they worked that out. I mean, we're talking 7 years later, and they're going, or 8 years later, and they're going back and trying to find out what his internet usage was on a particular night. That's interesting that they could have found that out. Okay.
So after he gave that evidence, obviously red flags.
So
all
many
over
red
the
flags.
place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, but the brazenness of the
Admissions.
But one thing I always, well, not always find, but one thing I think is strange is when people offer explanations, they offer opinions. So police ask them a question, where were you on the night or something, and they'll give the facts about where they were, but then they'll offer an opinion, and I always think that's dangerous because so
give away things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this idea that he's saying things like, "Oh, you couldn't commit the offence and kill a child in 30 minutes." I mean, that's an opinion. I think when people are offering opinions about how things occur or didn't occur, it's a bit of a red flag.
Well, he obviously felt pretty confident that so much time had elapsed that he had gotten away with it.
Yeah.
So anyway, after the evidence at the inquest,
Yes.
a covert operation was commenced in relation to Cowan.
Yes.
36 undercover police officers from
Jeepers.
Queensland, Western Australia and Victoria were all involved.
How did Victoria get involved?
I guess he was travelling to and from.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And an undercover police officer befriended Cowan during the plane flight on his return to Western Australia. He was introduced through this new friend to a criminal gang.
Wow.
Completely made up of undercover officers.
Yeah, and it was just a made-up gang. It
Made
wasn't-
up gang.
Yeah.
Yes.
What did they have a name?
Oh, I didn't write that down.
The Undercover Boys. Who
Yeah.
knows? Anyway.
So he wanted to get in with this crime gang. So
Yeah.
he participated in what they call scenarios.
Yes.
And there's a whole lot of information about covert operations and scenario evidence
Yeah.
and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
so that he could prove his worth and
To
his
the
value
gang.
to the gang
Yeah.
and become admitted into the gang.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to be a certain personality type. I mean, if some person came up to me and said, "Did you want to join a gang?" I'd be like, "No, I'm not interested."
I'd be out of there so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a personality type that they'd identified, and they sort of
Yes. Well, he had to commit particular offences
Yeah.
to prove his worth, and he got paid for those.
okay,
So
interesting.
it kept him on the hook.
Yeah.
And it was all meant to culminate in a meeting with the big boss,
Right. Yeah.
Arnold,
Arnold.
prior to Cowan's involvement in a crime, which would yield him $100,000. So he was getting into the big ticket items.
What I'd be asking, why are you paying me? Like, where are you making the money if you're paying me $100,000? Like, what is it?
Well, I
that-
think it was meant to be this big crime gang. So he'd
Sure.
been doing littler jobs, proving his worth, getting paid, building up to the big payday.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm not sure the economics of it works out. I'd be asking questions about that. But anyway, he obviously not asking about what it's all about.
No, he just was enjoying the money, I think. And the excitement,
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, so in the meantime, he got summoned to go back. He was recalled to the inquest.
Is that part of the undercover job, or did
I
that?
think so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In August, he met with Arnold, the big boss of
Ah.
the crime gang.
Yep. Okay.
And Arnold told Cowan, I can help you out with your alibi evidence if you
yeah.
need me to. But you've got to be honest with me
Yeah.
so that I can help you sort it out.
Yes.
And I think this all happened because Sandy, who had sold him the drugs, they'd found out that she was actually at the RSL or the Bowls Club on the day
Right.
and couldn't have met with him. So his alibi was stuffed.
Right. So I wonder how they found that out. They got really old
She
CCTV.
had a card, gambling
RSL,
card or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah. In the spirit of honesty with Arnold, the big boss,
Mm.
Cowan volunteered that he had in fact abducted Daniel after
Yes.
seeing him at the bus stop
Yes.
soon after he'd driven past
Yes.
the broken down other vehicle.
Yeah, the blue vehicle was broken down.
And after he saw Daniel, he drove into the car park of the Christian Outreach Centre, parked behind some trees so the car was out of sight, and walked down to the bus stop.
Oh.
He offered Daniel a lift to the shopping centre and Daniel accepted.
Okay. Can I just pause here? I just want to say something about police operations. So, this is great that they catch Daniel Cowan, who's clearly guilty.
Brett Cowan.
Brett Cowan, because he's clearly guilty. That's fantastic. But the police operations, can be problematic because...
The covert operations.
Covert operations. Because of this idea of entrapment, that they either get people to commit offences who wouldn't otherwise commit offences except for the operation, or, which I think is more closely related to this case, they breach his right to silence. So he's got a right not to incriminate himself, and that includes a right not to be tricked into incriminating himself. But
But I mean, this is, and I don't want to get too legalish here,
Sure.
but this was the whole, anyone who's interested can go look
X7.
at Swaffield and Pavage,
Swaffield. Oh, okay.
which were the original
Yes.
ones where they talk about the difference
Yes.
between entrapment.
Yes.
And they say if you are able to get information without, actively eliciting it,
Yeah.
if it comes through the course of the conversation and they volunteer it,
Yeah.
then it's admissible because they're choosing to speak.
Yes. So the idea is you have because you have a right to silence, you need to sort of make the conscious choice to speak or be silent. And I'm not and it was a point of appeal that there was some problem,
Yes.
that this was an unfair undercover operation. The courts said no, it was fine. But I just think too often people are very cavalier about these undercover operations, and they seem to think that police can just do anything to trick you into it. And they can't, and there are rules around it. And this operation, I think, probably went very close to the line, but not over it.
It was very similar to Toffelau, which is another High Court case where they had a fictional crime gang.
Yes, that's right.
And he made confessions.
Yes.
And they tried to argue that because he was confessing to police officers, it breached the rules, but he didn't know they were police officers. Yes. So
yeah.
I also think, yes, I understand the concerns about entrapment, but if they did not have the ability to conduct covert operations like this, Cowan probably would never have given up the location of Daniel Morcombe.
Sure. Look, it's a grey area, and as I say, whether this breached the rules was a matter of appeal, and it's been determined legally not to have been.
Yes,
but it's not. Yeah,
it's not carte blanche to do what they like.
Correct. I just get the feeling that people sometimes think that the police can just do whatever they like to get a conviction, and they can't. And
and there are cases where police conduct has been ruled unlawful.
Well, Swaffield was one of them, wasn't it? Didn't
Swaffield was one. Pavich, it was allowed.
Yeah, so Swaffield is the case. The boy's in prison, and they go and tell him that his brother's confessed and said that he's done the
No, that was
arson.
Foster.
Oh, was that Foster?
No,
okay.
Swaffield was the guy who was suspected of arson, and he had exercised his right to silence.
Yes.
And then he's sitting at a pub in Rocky, and they went and sat next to him and led the conversation to arson.
Right.
And made it very, it was less about natural flow of conversation.
Yes.
And so they said, no, you actively elicited that information. That's circumventing the right to silence.
Yeah. Although I must say, based on what's come, in terms of Toffelau and Cowan, I reckon if Swaffield happened again, they'd probably let it through.
Maybe. All right, so let me just finish this bit off. So he said that he then drove Daniel to an abandoned house on Kings Road in the Glasshouse Mountains. He told Daniel he had to call his wife to tell her where he was going. He then invited Daniel into the building to have a glass of water. He told Arnold that once Daniel was inside, he did attempt to sexually assault him. He said he had choked Daniel after he resisted and tried to escape. He said it was an opportunistic offence. He said that he killed Daniel for no other reason than to avoid detection for his offences. He then placed Daniel's body in the back of his Pajero and disposed of it in thick bushland near an old sand mining site.
Yes.
He had later thrown Daniel's clothing and shoes from a bridge into a creek.
And they were never found, were they? No.
He returned to the property a week later with a shovel to dispose of any evidence. He found a bone fragment at that time, which he broke up and he buried.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of sexual offending against children, the way this occurred is quite rare. It's usually somebody the child knows.
That's
There's
right.
usually a long period of grooming, and the offences occur, at some, at a birthday party or something like that. So this is so horrible, but it is actually quite rare.
Well, when we talk about stranger danger, I mean, this is the textbook example of stranger danger.
I know.
Don't
take
a lift with someone you don't know. But you're right. It's more often someone known to the victim.
Yes.
So a couple of days later, Cowan flew to Queensland with undercover operatives. He drove with them along the route he took when he abducted Daniel.
Oh, that's right. They say, well, you've got to prove that you committed
That's
the
right.
murder. And so he takes them to the site.
That's right.
Yeah.
He took them to the abandoned house. He pointed out the location and said, that's where it happened. That's where I thought he was going to run. My arm went around his neck and I choked him out. I actually felt that break in there.
Oh, jeepers.
Yeah. So he was arrested.
Yeah.
On the 13th of August, Daniel Morcombe's remains and items of clothing were subsequently recovered.
Oh, they did
some
recover.
of it.
Wow.
He was tried, convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in 2014.
Yes.
After 7.5 hours of deliberation, the Supreme Court jury found him guilty of murder. He was 44 at the time he was convicted, so he was still very much a young man when he committed this offence. So he was found guilty of murder, indecent treatment of a child and interfering with the corpse. He was emotionless when the verdicts were read out to a packed courtroom. In contrast, the Morcombe family were very emotional and Daniel's twin brother burst into tears.
Yeah.
The killer was asked if he had anything to say. He replied no. and court was adjourned. In his victim impact statement to the court, Daniel's dad, Bruce, said he remained haunted by thoughts of how long his son was held captive and what was done to him.
Yeah.
And outside court, Assistant Commissioner Mike Condon, who was subject to questioning, said he was happy with the verdict and thanked all of the police involved, saying it had been a lengthy, complex and very protracted investigation.
Yeah, so that's 2014, end of the trial.
Yes.
And then there is a
further
inquest
2016,
in which Mike Condon's conduct during the investigation is not found to be,
and we'll have a
optimal.
Talk about that possibly in the next episode.
Wow.
He did appeal.
Yes,
Cowan appealed
yes.
his convictions. The
undercover operation
sentence was also appealed, and both appeals were dismissed.
Yeah.
The judge said he was required to serve a non-parole period of at least 15 years. She said she felt his crimes warranted a harsher penalty. Everything about what you did to that child was horrific and disgraceful. This is not just a murder, but a terrible murder. She said he'd never shown any remorse. 15 years.
That's all. Mandatory life imprisonment in Queensland, and maybe the judges don't have a discretion about the parole period. Maybe it's in legislation. I don't.
I think it can be 15, 20 or 25.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know. I might have made that up. I haven't had any murder convictions.
No.
Personally. Or professionally.
Yeah.
So the Crown appealed that the sentence was manifestly inadequate, but the Court of Appeal said no.
So 15 years, sorry to interrupt, 15 years in 2014. So he comes up for parole in 2029. Is that right? My math's right there?
Yep.
Okay.
The application for special leave to the High Court was refused.
Yes.
And that appeal to the High Court was based on the police operation.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So are we going to have part 2 to find out
We'll have to have part 2.
Where we discuss the problems with the police investigation.
The police investigation, but also some positive, other unresolved consequences of Daniel Morcombe's case.
Yeah.
I guess, it's a bit of a high to finish on that. The killer was found and convicted.
Sure.
And that Daniel Morcombe's family had,
some closure.
That's right. But, the consequences are still being felt today, I think,
in Queensland and around Australia, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I think Daniel Morcombe would be one of the more well-known victims in our recent history.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very sad for that poor little boy and his family.
Oh, absolutely.
But we'll hear the procedural outcomes next week.
All right. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.